In the heart of the 1960s, Nashville, Tennessee wasn't just a city, it was a kingdom. Its rulers were producers in sharp suits. Its knights were session musicians who could craft a hit in a single afternoon. And its queens? Well, its queens wore rhinestone gowns and sang of heartbreak at the Grand Ole Opry. Their names are etched into history. Patsy, Loretta, Tammy, Dolly. They were the voices that defined an era, their songs the soundtrack to millions of lives, their stories a carefully curated blend of down-home charm and domestic drama. But what happens when a voice, one of the most powerful and soulful voices of them all, belongs to a woman who doesn't fit the crown? A woman whose own story of heartbreak couldn't be told, whose greatest love had to remain a secret, whispered only in the shadows of Music Row. This is the story of a forgotten queen of Nashville, a singer whose talent was undeniable, but whose truth was considered untenable. Her name was Wilma Burgess, and her life is one of the most compelling and quietly courageous stories that country music ever tried to erase. To understand her journey, you have to understand the world she was trying to conquer, a world that both made her and ultimately tried to break her. But illusions, by their very nature, require the omission of certain truths. And beyond the glow of the Reman stage and the smoky backrooms of the publishing houses on Music Row, and in the hushed wood-paneled control rooms of the recording studios, another Nashville existed. This was a city of unspoken rules, of fierce conformity disguised as tradition. It was a town that could build a star overnight and crush one with a well-placed whisper. It celebrated authenticity, but only a very specific marketable version of it. And into this dazzling, dangerous kingdom, a new voice was about to arrive. It was a voice unlike any other, a deep, velvety contralto that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 blues songs and 1,000 lonely nights. It was a voice that held a different kind of truth, a secret song of a heartbreak that could never be named, a love that dared not speak its name. This voice belonged to a young woman from Florida named Wilma Burgess, and her story would become one of the most poignant and powerful testaments to the cost of being different in a world that demanded everyone be the same. Her journey would expose the fault line running directly beneath the rhinestone-encrusted stage of Nashville, the deep chasm between the stories the city sold and the secrets it kept. To truly understand the trajectory of Wilma Burgess, her meteoric rise and her mystifying tragic fade, one must first understand the world she entered. The Nashville of the mid-1960s was in the throes of a sonic revolution. The raw-boned, fiddle-driven honky-tonk sound that had defined the post-war era was beginning to feel dated to a new generation of listeners, raised on the smoother sounds of pop radio and rock and roll. Country music was at a crossroads. Its rural audience was shrinking, and the industry faced a crisis of relevance. The answer to this crisis was born in two unassuming, almost primitive-looking studios, RCA Studio B, a modest cinder-block building, and the Quonset hut, a cavernous, semicircular steel structure originally built as a military barracks. These were the laboratories where a new sound was being forged, a sound that would save country music by making it more palatable to the rest of the world. It was called the Nashville sound. The chief alchemist of this new sound was a quiet, bespectacled producer named Owen Bradley. Bradley, along with his contemporary Chet Atkins at RCA, believed that a great country song could transcend its genre if it were dressed in the right clothes. He began to strip away the hillbilly elements, the keening fiddles, the twangy steel guitars, the nasal vocals, and replace them with the sophisticated instrumentation of pop music. In came lush string sections, often arranged by the brilliant Anita Kerr, whose soaring orchestrations could make a simple song of heartbreak feel like a grand cinematic tragedy. In came the slip note piano stylings of Floyd Kramer, whose cascading notes added a touch of elegance and whimsy. In came the gentle rhythmic pulse of electric bass played by Bob Moore, and the steady, subtle brushwork on the drums by Buddy Harman. And floating over it all were the celestial, angelic harmonies of vocal groups like the Jordanaires or the Anita Kerr Singers, who could wrap a lead vocal in a warm, comforting blanket of sound. This was music made with meticulous precision. Bradley was a master psychologist in the studio, known for his calm demeanor and his ability to coax deeply emotional performances from his artists. He would often record in low light to create an intimate, focused atmosphere. He was one of the pioneers of overdubbing, allowing him to layer sounds and perfect each element of the recording. The result was a polished, countrypolitan sound that was radio-friendly and commercially potent. It was the sound that turned Patsy Cline from a regional honky-tonk singer into a national superstar with crossover smashes like Crazy and I Fall to Pieces. Her tragic death in a 1963 plane crash had left a gaping void in Nashville, a throne without an heir. Owen Bradley, heartbroken by the loss of his greatest collaborator and friend, was searching for a new voice, a new vessel for the kind of profound, soulful ballads that had defined his work with Patsy. He was looking for an artist who could convey that same depth of emotion, that same once-in-a-generation talent. And in 1964, a simple demo tape from an unknown singer landed on his desk. The voice on that tape belonged to Wilma Burgess. She wasn't a product of the Appalachian coalfields or the Texas dance halls. She was a product of sunny suburban Florida, a world away from the traditional heartland of country music. Born in Orlando in 1939, she grew up in a household that was musical, but not in the rustic, down-home way that Nashville storytellers loved. Her father, a professional musician, played in popular big bands, filling their home with the sounds of Glenn Miller and Tommy Dorsey alongside the country hits of the day. For young Wilma, music was simply the family business, a constant presence that she took for granted. She showed little interest in performing herself. Her passions lay elsewhere, on the softball fields and basketball courts. She was athletic, practical, and grounded, pursuing a degree in physical education at Stetson University with the intention of becoming a teacher or a coach. Her voice was a gift she rarely used, something she brought out at parties or for friends, never thinking of it as a potential career. The turning point, as it so often is in these stories, came by chance. A friend, mesmerized by the power and richness of her voice, practically dragged her onto the stage at a local club one evening. The room fell silent as she sang. The sound that emerged was startling, a deep, resonant contralto that seemed to come from a place of profound experience. It was a voice that held shades of blues, a touch of jazz, and a whole lot of soul. It wasn't the high, lonesome sound of the mountains. It was the low, intimate sound of a smoky room after midnight. The applause that followed was more than just polite. It was a roar of discovery. In that moment, Wilma felt a spark, a connection to the music and the audience that she had never imagined. A new path, one leading far away from the gymnasiums and classrooms of Florida, began to open before her. With a newfound determination, she made the decision that would alter the course of her life. She would move to Nashville, but the pragmatist in her remained. She was acutely aware that Music City was a town littered with broken dreams, a place where thousands of hopefuls arrived each year only to be chewed up and spit out by the relentless machinery of the industry. So she came with a backup plan. By day, she enrolled in secretarial school, learning the practical skills of typing and shorthand that could guarantee her a steady paycheck. She was taking no chances. but by night she immersed herself in the city's musical underbelly. She sang in the small, crowded clubs and bars that dotted the landscape around Broadway, places where songwriters peddled their latest tunes and aspiring artists showcased their talents for a handful of dollars and the slim hope of being discovered. It was in these clubs that she began to hone her style. She wasn't a flashy performer. She didn't have the folksy charm of Loretta or the firecracker stage presence of Brenda Lee. Her power was in her stillness, in her ability to stand at a microphone and pour every ounce of emotion she possessed into a lyric. She was a storyteller, a torch singer in the truest sense of the word. She gravitated toward songs of love and, more often, of loss. Her performances were raw, intimate confessions, and people listened. It was during this period that she, with the help of a local songwriter, put together a simple demo tape, a calling card, to be sent to the gatekeepers on Music Row. One of those tapes, through a fortunate chain of connections, found its way to the Decca Records building and into the hands of the one man who could change her life forever. When Owen Bradley pressed play and heard Wilma Burgess's voice for the first time, he heard the future. He heard that rare combination of vulnerability and power that he had so masterfully captured with Patsy Cline. But he also heard something entirely new. Wilma's voice had a different texture, a bluesier, more soulful quality. It was less about country twang and more about emotional ache. Here was a voice that could not only sing the sophisticated ballads of the Nashville sound, but could elevate them, infusing them with a depth and maturity that was astonishing for a singer her age. He summoned her to his office immediately. The secretarial student from Florida, who had been cautiously hedging her bets, suddenly found herself sitting across from the most powerful and respected producer in country music. Bradley didn't just offer her a recording contract with Decca Records. He offered her his personal mentorship. The kingmaker had found his new queen. The stage was set, the orchestra was tuned, and the journey of Wilma Burgess was about to begin in earnest. A journey that would take her to the highest peaks of Nashville and into the loneliest, most hidden valleys of the human heart. A record deal in Nashville was a key, but it did not guarantee entry into the kingdom. It was merely the chance to prove you belonged there. For Wilma Burgess, the initial thrill of being discovered by Owen Bradley quickly gave way to the immense, terrifying pressure of expectation. The journey from a hopeful demo tape to a hit single was a treacherous one, and it led directly through the doors of the Quonset hut. Here, surrounded by the city's most formidable musicians, she would have to do more than just sing. She would have to channel the raw, secret emotions of her life into a sound that could captivate a nation, all under the watchful ear of the man who saw in her the ghost of his greatest star. From the outside, the Quonset hut studio was an unremarkable military surplus building, but inside, it was the sacred laboratory where producer Owen Bradley and the legendary Nashville A-team of session musicians forged the Nashville sound. For Wilma Burgess, this humble space would be where her voice was truly born. Her first sessions as a Decca Records artist were a baptism by fire, standing before titans of the industry like Floyd Kramer and Grady Martin, who were now waiting for her to lead. The intimidation was immense, but Owen Bradley had a gift for turning terror into trust. He worked in low light, creating an intimate atmosphere where he gently coached Wilma to treat the microphone like a confidant. He understood her power was in intimacy, not belting, and he painstakingly sculpted her vocal performances take after take. He would capture the raw, emotional heart of a song with just her voice and the core rhythm track, and only then would he begin building the lush arrangement around it. This was the magic of the Nashville sound. In later sessions, Bradley would layer in soaring string sections and the ethereal harmonies of backup groups like the Jordanaires. Hearing the final playback was a revelation. Her voice was now at the center of a lush cinematic soundscape that magnified rather than overwhelmed her. The first fruit of this collaboration was Baby, a soaring ballad that shot up the Billboard country charts in 1965, reaching the top 10. The surreal experience of hearing her own voice on the radio confirmed her new reality. Wilma Burgess was no longer a secretarial student with a backup plan. She was a star. With a hit record came the ultimate rite of passage, a debut on the Grand Ole Opry. Stepping into the hallowed circle of wood on the Ryman Auditorium stage, she faced the toughest, most traditional audience in the world. Her sophisticated, soulful style was different, but as she sang Baby, the power and purity of her voice commanded a hush over the auditorium, which then erupted in applause. She had been accepted. This success propelled her onto grueling package tours, a blur of endless highways and one-night shows. Yet even in this whirlwind, her private reality set her apart, as her personal life remained a closed book. It was during this time that her life became inextricably linked with Mary Ann Chumley, a sharp and respected record promoter on Music Row. Their connection was immediate and profound, blossoming into a love affair that had to be conducted in the margins of the industry. Their life together was a masterpiece of careful orchestration. In public, they were merely colleagues, but the risk of their secret being exposed in the small town of Nashville was a source of constant low-grade fear. An innocent question from a DJ about her love life could send a jolt of panic through her. This profound hidden love became the secret fuel for her art. The stage was the only place she could safely express her truth, disguised within the conventional tropes of country heartache. When she sang Don't Touch Me, a song about an agonizingly out-of-reach love, she was living the lyrics. The audience heard the story of an illicit affair, but Wilma was singing about a legitimate, all-encompassing love that society had deemed illicit. The microphone became her only confidant. Her career continued to build until 1966, when she found the song that would define her, Misty Blue. From its iconic piano intro to the swelling strings, the recording session was a legendary alignment of talent. Wilma's performance was a masterclass in control, her voice moving from a fragile, breathy intimacy in the verses to a full, rich power in the chorus. Bradley's flawless production wrapped her voice in a blanket of sound without ever obscuring the raw, heartbreaking emotion at its core. Misty Blue was a phenomenon, a top 5 country smash that crossed over to pop radio and became her signature song. For a brief, shining moment, Wilma Burgess stood at the absolute pinnacle of her profession. It seemed her talent was so immense it could conquer anything, but the higher the climb, the more treacherous the peak, and the whispers in the shadows of Music Row were beginning to grow into a menacing chorus. The view from the top of the charts is both dazzling and dangerously exposed. With the monumental success of Misty Blue, Wilma Burgess was no longer just a rising star. She was a fixture in the Nashville firmament. But fame is a magnifying glass, and in a town built on carefully curated images, it shines a relentless light into every corner of an artist's life. The very success that made her voice inescapable also made her private life a subject of increasing speculation. The unwritten rules of the Nashville establishment, which she had so carefully navigated on her way up, now became a far more menacing obstacle. The whispers that had once been easy to ignore were about to become a roar, threatening to topple the entire fragile architecture of her career. In the aftermath of Misty Blue, Wilma Burgess was a bona fide star, but her new level of fame brought intense scrutiny. As a headliner, she faced more personal questions, and the invisible wall she and Mary Ann Chumley had built around their private life felt increasingly fragile. Nashville, in the late 1960s, was a city of unwritten rules, a deeply conservative town where its female stars were expected to represent wholesome, family-centric values. The two acceptable archetypes were the devoted wife and mother, like Loretta Lynn, or the glamorous victim of a no-good man, a role Tammy Wynette was perfecting. Both narratives revolved around men. Wilma Burgess fit neither mold. Her persona was that of a soulful torch singer. But with no public storyline to explain her sorrow, she became a commercial liability. In an industry that sold simple narratives, her silence was interpreted as a dangerous secret, making her a target. Soon, a whisper campaign began to undermine her career. It wasn't a formal conspiracy, but a creeping consensus among the industry's gatekeepers. A DJ might suddenly decide her new single lacked buzz, or a TV producer would book a safer act. It was professional sabotage through 1,000 tiny, deniable cuts, driven by a prejudice no one would name aloud. The most painful part was that her music never faltered. Her collaboration with Owen Bradley continued to produce records of astonishing quality. Yet outside the studio, the landscape was hostile. Masterpieces they were sure would be hits would languish on the charts, their trajectory one of slow, steady decline from top 10s to top 20s, and then barely charting at all. The frustration was immense. Even her champion, Owen Bradley, a powerful executive who believed in her talent, was caught in an impossible position. He could control the sound in his studio, but not the whispers outside of it. To be fair, other forces were at play. By the early 1970s, the polished Nashville sound was fracturing, giving way to the gritty outlaw movement and a wave of pop country crossovers. The industry was in flux, but other stars of her generation, like Dolly Parton and Loretta Lynn, adapted by evolving their public narratives. Wilma had no such option. Her most essential story was the one she could not tell, and her inability to play the game of celebrity left her stranded. The cumulative effect of the whispers, the stalling career, and the changing industry slowly eroded her spirit. The joy of music was replaced by weary resignation as the spotlight became an interrogation lamp. The emotional toll of hiding her life, combined with the exhaustion of fighting an invisible enemy, was simply too much. Her departure wasn't a single dramatic moment, but a gradual retreat. After her contract with Decca expired, she turned down new offers, knowing they would only lead to the same disappointment. She chose to silence her own magnificent voice rather than participate in an industry that celebrated it while condemning the life it was connected to. It was an act of profound self-respect, a quiet refusal to be broken. She was choosing her life, her peace, and her love for Mary Ann over a tarnished crown, abdicating her throne to build a new kingdom on her own terms. The act of walking away from a dream is its own kind of heartbreak, a quiet, personal surrender. For Wilma Burgess, leaving the music business was an admission that the game was rigged, the fight unwinnable. But her story was never one of surrender. By choosing to end her recording career, she was making a defiant statement. If she could not be her whole self within the confines of Nashville's spotlight, she would create a new stage where everyone was welcome. This next chapter was not a retreat into the shadows, but a bold march into the light, not as a performer seeking applause, but as a founder building a sanctuary, proving that the end of a song is often the beginning of a far more powerful legacy. For a recording artist, silence is a kind of death. The end of a career is often a slow fade into obscurity, a gradual descent into the "where are they now" file. When Wilma Burgess walked away from Music Row in the mid-1970s, many in the industry likely assumed that this would be her fate. They saw it as the inevitable conclusion for an artist who couldn't or wouldn't play the game. What they failed to understand was that for Wilma, this silence was not an ending. It was a liberation. It was the sound of a cage door swinging open, the first deep, cleansing breath after years of holding it in. She was no longer beholden to the whims of radio programmers or the judgment of industry executives. She no longer had to deflect prying questions or live with the constant fear of exposure. The pressure was finally off. She had lost her career, but in doing so, she had reclaimed her life. Instead of leaving Nashville, a city that had been the source of both her greatest triumphs and her deepest wounds, she and Mary Ann Chumley decided to plant a flag. They pooled their resources and embarked on a new venture, one that would be a stunning act of defiance and a beautiful gesture of community. They opened a bar. They called it the Hitching Post. The name was a masterstroke of irony, a sly wink at the wholesome cowboy and sweetheart imagery of the very industry that had cast her aside. It was as if she were reclaiming the symbols of country music and repurposing them for a world that the Grand Ole Opry refused to acknowledge. From the outside, the Hitching Post looked like any other neighborhood tavern. But inside, it became something legendary. In the Nashville of the 1970s and 80s, a city still firmly in the grip of conservative Southern culture, there were virtually no safe public spaces for the LGBTQ plus community. Life was lived in the shadows, in private homes and secret parties. The Hitching Post changed that. It became Nashville's first widely known and welcoming gay bar, a sanctuary where people could walk through the doors and leave their masks behind. The bar became the unofficial community center for a hidden generation. It was a place where closeted musicians, songwriters, producers, and fans, people who had to navigate the same treacherous double life that Wilma had endured, could finally gather without fear. They could have a drink, share stories, laugh, and listen to music in an atmosphere of complete and unconditional acceptance. The jukebox was likely filled with the country hits of the day, but here, the heartbreaking lyrics of a George Jones or Tammy Wynette song could be heard in a new context, resonating with a community that understood heartbreak on a profound level. The joy and relief within those walls must have been palpable. It was more than a bar. It was a home. In this new role, Wilma Burgess underwent a remarkable transformation. The quiet, reserved star, who had always seemed to be guarding a secret, was now the warm, welcoming proprietor, the matriarch of this chosen family. She moved from table to table, greeting regulars by name, sharing a laugh, offering a word of encouragement. Her new stage was the floor of her own establishment, and her new audience was the community she had personally fostered. Occasionally, late at night, when the mood was right and the bar was filled with friends, she would get up and sing. In this space, her voice, free from the pressures and coded meanings of her recording career, must have sounded more powerful and liberated than ever before. Here, when she sang of a broken heart, everyone in the room knew exactly what she meant. This was a different kind of success, one not measured by chart positions or gold records, but by the tangible impact she had on the lives of others. The music industry had demanded she hide her identity to sell songs about love. At the Hitching Post, she used her hard-won freedom to create a space where love, in all its forms, could be openly celebrated. It could be argued that this was her true legacy, a more meaningful and lasting contribution than any hit record. She had taken the pain and prejudice she had suffered and transformed it into a source of healing and strength for an entire community. Wilma and Mary Ann ran the Hitching Post for several years before eventually selling it and retiring to a quieter life, their work as community builders done. Wilma lived the rest of her years largely out of the public eye, at peace and on her own terms, with Mary Ann by her side. When she died of a heart attack in 2003 at the age of 64, the initial obituaries in the mainstream press were brief and focused primarily on her musical career. They mentioned her as the singer of Misty Blue, a notable voice from the Nashville sound era, another star from the past who had faded away. The deeper, more courageous story of her life was largely omitted. But history is a living thing, constantly being re-examined and revised. In the years since her death, as a new generation of writers and historians has begun to uncover the hidden histories of country music, Wilma's story has been brought out of the shadows. Her career is now seen as a pivotal, if tragic, case study of the systemic prejudice that operated at the heart of Music Row. She is no longer viewed as a one-hit wonder who couldn't maintain her momentum, but as a major talent whose potential was deliberately curtailed. Her quiet courage has also been given its due. Long before artists like K.D. Lang challenged the gender norms of country music, and decades before Shelley Wright and T.J. Osborne made the brave decision to come out publicly, Wilma Burgess was living her truth in a far more dangerous and unforgiving time. She wasn't an activist in the modern sense, but her refusal to compromise her personal life and her eventual decision to walk away rather than live a lie was an act of profound integrity. She helped clear a path that others would later walk, even if they never knew her name. And knowing her full story forever changes the way we hear her music. When you listen to her records now, you can hear the layers of meaning she was forced to embed within them. Don't Touch Me is no longer just a clever song about an impossible affair. It is a desperate, coded plea from a woman living a love society deemed untouchable. And Misty Blue is transformed. It is more than just a beautiful, sad song. It's an anthem of survival. It's the sound of a woman who, surrounded by a world of judgment and risk, managed to create something timeless and true. The Misty Blue she sings of is not just the memory of a lost lover. It's the haze of a life lived in the shadows, a sorrow that could never fully be explained. In the grand rhinestone narrative of country music, Wilma Burgess remains something of a ghost, a forgotten queen from a bygone era. She was a woman with a voice for the ages who lived in a time that was not ready for her truth. The kingdom of Nashville celebrated her gift, but condemned the heart from which that gift flowed. But her story is ultimately not one of failure. It is the story of a rare and resilient victory. She was denied the superstardom she so richly deserved, but she found a different, more meaningful kind of success. Her legacy lives on, not just in the grooves of her timeless records, but in the echoes of laughter and music that once filled a small safe haven in Nashville called the Hitching Post. She came to Music City seeking a throne, and when she was turned away, she simply went and built a kingdom of her own.